who is who or even what's what. Knickers and trousers, baggy and wide, nobody knows who's walking inside. Those masculine women and feminine men.
looked at being gay or trans in music. Well, we're just about to change that. Jonathan Holmes is with me, and BBC sound recordist, so you're good at your sound.
I've been enjoying your microphone actually on the table, so it's been quite fun watching how that works.
Right, music. Now, you are a collector.
Yes.
Of records. Now, are they 78s, I guess?
Yes, they are. Yeah. So
please tell me you have an old HMV record player with the handle.
I've got a Columbia machine actually, Columbia 109. I think it was made about 1929. So HMVs are generally a bit more expensive gramophones from that period, and it was the Columbia gramophone that actually got me started in record collecting. So I have it on display in my front room. And it's a nice little display piece, and I get it out every now and again when visitors come round.
Yeah. Oh, you mean it's not out all the time?
No, well, it's on display, but it's just static, you know. It's yeah. I don't want to upset the neighbours too much. It can be rather loud.
Yeah.
So yes, it's a lovely little machine, and yeah, I guess it's the iPod of its day, really.
Now we've just come off the back of one of the first tracks out of 3 that we're going to be playing.
Yes.
78s, obviously, you can't buy anymore.
No, sadly not.
These come from the Roaring '20s.
Yeah.
Now, this followed the First World War. It was called the Great War until the Second World War started, and it was during the First World War. But after that, it seemed the world went crazy and become so free, and it was a good time to be gay.
I always find the 1920s kind of particularly interesting because it was a period of kind of great experimentation, I guess, and sort of reversal in traditional kind of gender roles and the norms that society kind of set down before you. So, for example, if you were a woman in the 1920s, it was very fashionable for you to have a very kind of flat-chested dress, and all the dresses were kind of cut in that way that kind of eliminated the kind of traditional sort of female figure, and you'd have a very kind of short cropped, like bob haircut. And likewise, if you're a man, for example, you may start experimenting with a bit of rouge or sort of makeup or lipstick or whatever to kind of accentuate maybe a bit more sort of feminine features. And you know, if you were rich and you had money in the 20s and you know, you happened to be gay or bisexual or lesbian or whatever, it was genuinely a sort of period of experimentation for you. And obviously, this was all still very, very illegal. And you know, this is still the era of kind of people being, you know, splashed on newspapers and outed, and they would have their careers and their lives destroyed because they'd be sent to prison for indecent acts and all that kind of thing. But you know, if you knew the right people and the right sort of connections, I think it was probably quite possible for you to live as an out person in you know, relatively free era of the 1920s.
Now, some of the terminology they use,
Yes. It's dated. It's dated today,
weird,
yes.
like the word fair.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing, and gay. The idea of sort of you saying I'm gay will not really exist because first of all you say I'm homosexual, and you wouldn't say that anyway because you don't admit it to anyone. So they often use terms like fairies or queer. Again, queer wasn't even a word because queer in the 20s just meant strange.
Yes.
And I found that strange. When I bought my
gay meant happy.
Yes, yeah. When I brought my gramophone home to my grandma for the first time, she was like, "Oh, it's exciting." And then she'd talk about how she'd seen some queer neighbours the other day, and she didn't mean she'd seen some gay neighbours. She meant she'd seen strange neighbours.
Yes.
And I found that strange hearing that. It's kind of weird how the language sort of changed, but there was a lot of kind of allusion. So people were fairies or they were effeminate or whatever, and it was never.
Nancy
it was
another word, isn't it?
Yes.
Nancy boy. And
it was often kind of acknowledged with a kind of wink, wink, nudge, nudge type situation, but never explicitly kind of, you are a homosexual, for example. And I keep referring to gay men because unfortunately I think they were the most sort of visible group of that era, really. I think certainly as far as kind of popular culture goes, or popular society, the idea that someone would be trans or someone would be lesbian was genuinely so far off the radar. People just genuinely didn't consider it was a thing, and it just it's almost kind of, I guess in a certain sense kind of mirrors how things have gone today. It kind of gay men tend to get a lot more kind of recognition and they're more visible, but in a sense it kind of was that way in the 20s. It was a lot of the songs which I have kind of just talk about gay men and they kind of ignore the rest of it, which I always find really interesting because I genuinely think it was a more simpler time, and not in a kind of this is a good thing, but it just wasn't on people's radar, which is very strange to think about. It's
was in the 20s. Was Berlin the centre of the universe for the LGBTQ community?
Berlin was a very, very kind of liberal and free place, and certainly that kind of existed until in the mid 1930s when the Nazis started cracking down on things, and obviously they saw a lot of what was going on as kind of degeneracy and all that kind of stuff. It was a very, very free, artistic, liberal place. But then likewise there were certain places in London where you could go and enjoy, experiment with your sexuality or your gender and be relatively accepted in a kind of nightclub setting, but you would never do that in public. You'd just be ostracised. And it's really sad. Queer people have always existed. You kind of think that they start existing in the 1950s or 60s when the protests start happening, but actually they've always existed. They just never talked about it. And there's a whole generation of people who lived and died and would have probably just had this thought in the back of their minds all the time, really, about what if things were different.
Once upon a time, there were 2 fairies. Now, there are a great many. Do you believe in fairies and the stories that never grow old? There are fairies at the bottom of the garden. That's a tale we've all been told. Let's think of those childhood days, then go back to our baby ways, and let's all be fairies. Tinkle, tinkle, crash, crash, crash. All dance around and go crazy, waving about the cap and daisy. We'll go whimsy, womsy, on tiptoe we'll say dash, dash. Let's all be fairies. Tinkle, tinkle, crash, crash, crash. Ding dong, fairy bells are gaily ringing. Ding dong, everybody's gaily singing, dancing round the moonbeams. Ta-da-da-da-da-da. Hear our fairy footsteps. Here we are. 2 great big burly boxers were engaged to appear in the ring. Said the slosher to the slogger, I won't hurt you if you don't hurt me, old thing. When we're in the ring tonight, there's no reason why we should fight. So let's both be fairies. Tinkle, tinkle, crash, crash, crash.
Don't get annoyed if I shove you. You can't imagine how I love you. We'll punch flimsy flimsy. You go out when I say bash. Let's both be fairies. Tinkle, tinkle, crash, crash, crash. Ding dong, fairy bells are gaily ringing. Ding dong, everybody's gaily singing, dancing round the moonbeams. La 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 la. Hear our fairy footsteps. Whoops, here we are.
Whoops, here we are.
You have just heard Let's All Be Fairies.
Which
So these 78 records that you have, and they seem to be very brittle, 78.
Yes, 78s are exceptionally brittle.
I remember my nan gave me a load, but they only lasted a week because they all smashed.
Yes, yeah. The very first records I bought I actually broke at Lincoln train station. I remember putting them behind the barriers and the doors open and there was a big crack. And then I learned that records are very valuable and very delicate. Obviously, they are replaceable. It's not like vinyl where it will bend a bit. They just shatter.
Yeah.
They're not really designed to be kind of drops. They will crack. As a kind of storage medium, it will last indefinitely, but it has to be looked after.
Jonathan, the cardboard one.
Yes, the cardboard one.
Is
now,
incredible.
I pulled this out. I've got this with me on the table here. I pulled this out earlier. And you were quite amazed by it. So
I've never seen a cardboard record before, which bends, and that's incredible.
Yeah. So Let's All Be Fairies that we just heard was printed on a label called Durium, and Durium was a label that existed in the sort of early 1930s when materials were scarce. And so what they did was it's kind of like an early EP. They would print 2 songs on one side, so you'd have a cardboard backing and a sort of resin covering, and the grooves would be really fine, and you'd be able to fit 2 songs on one side. It's about 2.5 minutes long on a 78 record, and they're a lot of fun. And I can throw them around and they won't break, unlike the shell records, which I would never ever do, especially considering the value of some of them.
Yeah. So how easy is it to find them? Are there loads left over from, let's say, the Fairies and the Nancy Boys and that? Is there
You'd be surprised. You'd honestly be surprised. I think everyone's nan and great-grandparents, for example, now had 78s, and a lot of them have literally sat in sheds or garages or attics, and then these people die and people find them. Obviously, a lot of the jazz ones and the good ones are kind of now circulating among collectors, and they've all found their way into collectors' hands. But even as late as perhaps the 70s and 80s and 90s, you could probably go to charity shops and find these things, 50 pence a pound.
Wow.
Most shops don't stock them now because obviously they're so delicate, and nobody wants to buy them anymore, apart from me. Nobody's buying them anymore. So eBay does a lot on eBay. Obviously, people pay silly money on eBay, which is kind of frustrating. But they still exist. You've just got to find them.
Was it a time when these records being made by gay guys, were they being listened to by families, unbeknownst to them that they were talking about?
I think it's kind of interesting. One of the singers that I picked out, a guy called Douglas Bing, and he was a very, very popular entertainer of his day, and his act was he would do female impersonations. So there's actually a film of this from, I think, 1930, 31, where it's a nightclub, and you go to a nightclub, and if we were going out to the 20th or 30s, we'd go to a nightclub, and we'd have maybe a band to dance to, we'd have some sort of cabaret act, so maybe a contortionist, a juggler, some sort of performing animal, and then maybe some singers, and Douglas Bing was one of these kind of cabaret artists. And he comes out, he has a tailcoat on, and then he puts a ball gown on top of his tailcoat and a little wig and some opera glasses. And he was like a female impersonator.
Wow.
And he was performing to high society in London, not necessarily kind of a family audience, but he was performing to men and women who it would be pretty obvious that he was a gay man, but he would never have been allowed to say that publicly. So if he'd have come out and said, "I am a homosexual man," it would be career suicide.
Yes.
But he would get away with, he's the pantomime dame character, female impersonator, let's put on a dress. And he sold records, and people bought these records because I've got one, and it's a lot of fun.
I guess it was similar for artists like Liberace, because when I was growing up as a kid, I didn't know what gay was, and you just thought he was very flamboyant and did it for the act.
It's a kind of implicit acknowledgement, but never acceptance, and that's what I say is people like Liberace and Douglas Bing and whatnot, they had to kind of live their lives in the closets in a way.
Yes.
And obviously it's great that they were able to perform, and frankly, kind of seeing a female impersonator act in the 30s, I think, is so revelatory. But in a sense, it's kind of a shame that that's the only way he would have been able to express his sexuality, was by sticking a ball gown on and, you know, pretending to be a woman.
Yeah.
It's such a fascinating time, and it's all good fun.
Yeah.
You know, it's good fun, and these songs, these things like Let's All Be Fairies and stuff, they were never written with malice. You know, it's not.
Well, they sound fun.
Yes,
don't
they sound fun.
Yeah.
I know we kind of look at the title and go, ooh, that's a bit dodgy now, but they were written to kind of poke fun at sort of changing gender roles, and people consider it a form of entertainment. You know, it was just a kind of, let's have a bit of a laugh at this. And it's obvious the singer is, you know, singing in a very kind of camp fashion. It's very obvious that although they're singing about fairies, what they're alluding to is, of course, gay men.
Yes,
it's very, very obvious.
Yeah.
And society would have recognised that.
Is there a website anywhere that people can get more information?
Ooh, interesting. Just basically search for my name, Jonathan Holmes, in YouTube, and I should be the top result. And there's a channel of 1920s and 30s music from this country, more than enough to kind of keep you busy, I think. And my email address is on there as well if you do want to get in touch and say hello.
So you must love it being BBC sound recorders, because you have access to some of the greatest stuff around the planet.
Yes, don't tell the bosses. No, of course the archive is very, very fascinating, and it's fun to kind of go through it sometimes and just sort of enjoy looking at, you know, these interviews. And Douglas Bing in particular, he appeared on Parkinson in the late 70s. And this is very interesting because he'd been performing since 1919, 1920, and here he was, well over 50 years later, appearing on Parkinson. And he does one of his acts, and he plays this kind of Scottish lady, and he comes out with lines like, he talks about this lady in a hotel, and he says, you know, I asked for a tartan room and got both. And he's like, you know, it's just kind of like, these jokes are sort of, they're fun, and it's very kind of, it's bawdy, but it's good natured, and he was performing until the sort of mid 1980s, and I find that absolutely fascinating that you know, these people were interviewed. I guess it's a kind of priceless record of that time, and even in the 70s, he didn't talk about his sexuality. Of course he didn't. He was just talking about appearing in the theatre and what people used to wear in the theatre and all that kind of stuff. You know.
Well, Jonathan Holmes, we've gone right out of time, and they've started to dig up the road, I think, outside the coffee shop. So we'll leave it there for now while everyone else, and of course we've got to finish our coffee.
Yes, of course.
And your sausage roll and my cinnamon
I need to finish that. Yes, quite.
Thank you, Jonathan.
All right.
We are most serene, we've a limousine, and a dainty maisonette in Golders Green, always live and gay, like the flowers in May. We are starring in the London Cabaret, we're the big sensation of the show, and the managers all adore us, so you ought to know. We're the boys, the Cabaret Boys, we're the leading London nightclub's only joys. Although our songs are always on the bright side, on Saturday night we're always just a trifle on the tight side. Palm comes out of the bar when he hears our music on the orchestra. We started to pop the music halls with dear old Dan, and though we were put on first we didn't do so bad, till we saw a couple of strong men and we both went mad. We're the nightclub joys, the Cabaret Boys. We've got lots of cheek and a baby peak, and we get a notice in the press each week. It's so hard to choose what we're going to lose, just to get our photos in the evening news. Beauty creams we often advertise, and also a lot of dreadful things that no one buys. We're the boys, the Cabaret Boys, we're the leading London nightclub's only joys. Although our songs are always on the bright side, on Saturday night we're always just a trifle on the tight side. We're fine at Christmas time, as the wicked robbers in the pantomime. We're right up against the fairy queen of starry nights. And though we're not supposed to sing and dance by rights,
We shall do a couple of high kicks if we burst our tights.
we're the nightclub joys, the cabaret boys. We're the boys, the cabaret boys. We're the leading London nightclub's only joys. We soon shall be a national institution.
We've been in the game for 60 years, oh what a constitution.
Tra-la-la-la-la, tra-la-la-la-la-la-la-la-la-la. We danced in the Russian Valley and in Lights Review.
But still there are lots of things we'd like to show to you.
How we wish we could dance in nothing like the fairies do. We're the nightclub joys, the cabaret boys.